Does exposure to media violence increase an individual's likelihood of engaging in violent behavior? In order to answer this question, we'll look at Bandura's famous experiment involving Bobo dolls. Imitation of film-mediated aggressive models by Albert Bandura, Dorothea Ross, and Sheila A. Ross was published in 1963 in the Journal of Abnormal Psychology. The aim of this experiment was to determine the effects of film-mediated violence on aggressive behavior in children by recording the extent to which children imitated the violent behavior seen on film. The researchers of this experiment hypothesized that children exposed to film-mediated violence would show a greater tendency towards aggressive behavior when presented with frustrating situations. The subjects of this experiment were 48 boys and 48 girls from the Stanford University Nursery. These children were aged between 35 and 69 months. The children were then divided into 3 experimental groups and 1 control group, each consisting of 24 children. The first experimental group was exposed to real-life violence. The second experimental group was exposed to film violence. The third experimental group was exposed to cartoon violence. And the control group was exposed to no violence. For each experimental group, the children were brought individually into a room containing potato prints, multicolor picture stickers, and colored paper for them to play with. On the opposite end of the room, there was a small table and chair, Tinker toy set, mallet, and a 5-foot-tall Bobo doll. A Bobo doll is an inflatable doll made of soft plastic that stands back up after being hit. For the first experimental group, a model entered the room with the child and after about a minute of assembling the Tinker toys, began to hit the Bobo doll. The following clip is a video recording from Bandura's experiment in 1961. As we can see here, the doll was hit several times on the nose with a mallet. It was lifted up in the air and repeatedly kicked. The model also threw it down on the ground, sat on it, and beat it up. All of this was accompanied by verbally abusive language. For the second experimental group, children were brought into the room and provided the same materials. They were then told that a film would be shown as they played with the materials provided. In the film, the same model from the first experiment was shown acting in a similar aggressive manner towards the Bobo doll. In the third experimental group, the experimenter entered the room and turned on a color TV. They were shown a female model dressed up as a cartoon cat in an unrealistic cartoon-like setting, including fake grass, once again acting in an identical violent manner to the first 2 experimental groups. For the last part of this experiment, children from all 4 groups were then made to be slightly frustrated and then brought into a room. They were presented with a variety of toys, including aggressive ones like the Bobo doll, mallet, and pegboard, 2 dart guns, and tether ball with a face painted on it. So what were the results of this experiment? The clip you're watching now is also from Bandura's 1961 experiment. As we can see, children are imitating the way the models behave towards the Bobo dolls. Here, the child is hitting the Bobo doll on the nose with a mallet just like the experimenter did. The child here even picked up the gun, although this was not used by the experimenter. They're even creating their own ways of hitting and beating up the doll using both aggressive and non-aggressive materials present in the room. This table shows the results recorded by Bandura, Ross, and Ross. As we can see from the table of results, Exposure to violence, regardless of whether it was real life, filmed, or cartoon, nearly doubled the level of aggression in children. It is also clear that boys are twice as likely as girls to engage in aggressive behavior. These researchers concluded that there is strong evidence to suggest that children's exposure to filmed violence increases aggressive behavior in them. Children who viewed filmed and cartoon violence showed nearly twice as much aggressiveness as those in the control group exposed to no form of violence. So what exactly do these results mean? It is evident from the results that there is a positive correlation between exposure to violence and subsequent aggression in children. Children were also much more prone to imitating filmed and cartoon violence over real-life violence. While the reason for this observation is not clear, it may have been because children were not as emotionally stimulated by filmed and cartoon violence as opposed to real-life violence, and so believed this form of violence was much more acceptable. There were, however, several flaws to this experiment, as pointed out by Hart and Chris Thomas. All of the children used in this experiment were from the Stanford University nursery, which at that time was only affordable for rich white families. The ethnicities of the children were not recorded, and this may have caused a sampling bias in the experiment. Since the ethnicities were not recorded, we are also not able to determine the role genetics may have played in the aggressive behavior of these children. Gauntlett and Ferguson also suggested that the children may have imitated the violent behavior they were exposed to simply because they believed it was what they were expected to do and would win the adults' approval if they exhibited similar aggressive behavior. Regardless of the children's actual motivations and reasons for displaying the aggressive behavior they did, it is undeniable that media violence can have very serious effects on children. With the belief that violent behavior is expected and rewarded, children can grow up to become aggressive adults. Although this particular study only looked at the effects of film-mediated violence on children, the implications of the results are frightening. As noted by Bushman, media violence can have long-term effects on children while it only causes short-term effects of aggression in adults. These long-term effects on children are far more serious because it shapes the child's personality and behaviors into something that might have been avoided had the child been kept away from media violence.